The NFL draft is just 10 days away. Will the Buccaneers replace Rachaad White? Maybe the Falcons add another wide receiver across from Drake London. Or could the Chiefs draft Travis Kelce's replacement? We get into which veterans will be sweating it out the most during the 2024 NFL draft on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk. When I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com. Check out all the latest on the draft prospects and the draft, including our latest mocks there at sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, today we're going to talk through running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. All the veterans that we are most worried about or we think could be at the biggest risk at losing the most value during the 2024 draft. Right. So we'll start with running backs. And as we talk through the names, we'll give them a ranking 1 through 10. Like, how worried are we while we sit there and watch the draft that they could be replaced or get a big chunk of their workload taken away? Right. So let's start right off the bat here with Rachaad White from the Buccaneers. We thought he would already be replaced at this point in free agency. He is not yet. How worried are you that he will be replaced in this draft? Do you think there's a good enough guy even here that the Buccaneers could take in the second or third round?
Yeah, it really is a weaker running back class. Let's start with that. I mean, you have one standout guy, Jonathan Brooks out of Texas, that could maybe hold down the fort for 3 downs, but everyone else is a little bit different. You have Braylon Allen out of Wisconsin. He's more of a power explosive back. You have Blake Corum, who's a smaller guy out of Michigan, who can maybe be a change of pace and help you in the passing game. I think there's a lot more of the latter, the Corum types in this draft. So I think you have to worry more if you're a power back, and these other type of backs are available all across the board. Another guy I really like is a Jalen Wright out of Tennessee. So there's a lot of different aspects of running backs that are going to be available in this draft. Now, Rachaad White, I think they like him, but there's one name I'm going to circle here that makes a lot of sense for the Buccaneers to draft. His name is Ray Davis. I like him out of Kentucky. Why I think they could target this kid? Liam Cohen is the new offensive coordinator of the Buccaneers. So he definitely worked with him at Kentucky. So that would be a good complement to what you'll get with Rachaad White. I think they have to draft some type of complement, because when you look at Chase Edmonds, he's similar, right? He can catch the ball in the backfield, a kind of a change of pace type guy. I think they need a bit of a power back in there. So something to look at. I don't think they'll invest a high pick, but a Davis pick would be something reasonable for them to go at, especially if Cohen knows him pretty well. So I'm not too worried about his particular fantasy value. It was a lot based on his receptions last year. He was a bad runner anyway. So if they're dedicated to that, I'm going to say it drops a little bit to me, but I'm going to say if we're going to say really worried to less worried, I'm going to put him right at a 5.
Yeah, I think I put him all the way down at a 3 because I don't think they spend no running back's going to go in the first. I don't think they spend a second rounder on a running back. So I think he's pretty safe for his workload. He had 62% of the carries last year for the Buccaneers. Do I think he's going to get 272 carries again? No, but I do think his workload is relatively safe as of right now and as of going into this draft. So I put him at like a 3 or a 4. However, Zamir White. So right now we're just concluding he's going to be the starting running back for the Raiders because they no longer have Josh Jacobs, which when Jacobs was healthy, pretty much saw all the workload. And then once Jacobs was out, it went to Zamir White, right? So we do expect whoever is this backfield, they're going to get a large workload. We'll see how good the offense is and if there's any scoring opportunities and how often they can actually stay in the field for if Aiden O'Connell is still their quarterback. But do you think the Raiders put an emphasis on finding a true workhorse running back in this draft?
Well, I think Zamir White is pretty good. And again, anyone who comes out of Georgia of late at that position has been pretty good in the NFL. And they really trusted him down the stretch. I think he did the most he could with his opportunities, had some big workloads here. You held up, and they're going to get someone to relieve him a little bit here because we don't have a lead back that we have a Jacobs and White being the backup. So now you need to find a backup to White here. So I think that's the type of player they're going to go after. Different type of backs definitely available here. This could be a fit for Corum. We'll see if they want to get him in there in that mix. But I look at Zamir White. I think he's got a pretty good overall skill set. I think he surprised them with some of the things he was able to do last year. And we were calling for it. Remember, we thought it's going to be the end of Josh Jacobs here pretty soon. We were excited because he had the Patriots offense coming in. Thought, okay, they're going to remix the backfield. They're going to go with the hot hand Zamir White. That never materialized. Josh Jacobs was the man here. Now they go in a different direction with Luke Getsy at offensive coordinator. So I think Zamir White's going to get his opportunities here to get significant touches. I don't know if it's going to go down too much based on this draft. So I'm going to put him down at a 2. I feel pretty safe. I think he's that good of a back.
I'm going to put him at like a 6 because I
Okay.
know they have a lot of needs and quarterback and even wide receiver, probably ahead of running back. But it's even if they do feel good about Zamir White, there's nobody behind him. So they have to add some bodies, right?
Yeah.
So I do think they use a third or fourth round pick possibly on a running back in this class. So, and that's pretty much where Zamir White was. So I do think there's a little bit worry here. I'll put him at a 5. What about old man James Conner? So the Cardinals, they have so many needs, right? I don't know if running back is really a place they should go, but James Conner's getting much older. They don't really have anybody behind him whatsoever. Do you think Connor could get his role taken away in this draft?
I don't think his role is going to go away. I feel pretty confident he's still going to be out there. And they didn't really have a lot of change when he had this Brown style of offense in Cleveland. I mean, they were pretty steady, and James Conner's produced. And again, I think you bring up a really good point. And this is with the Raiders and the Cardinals situation. Now, the Cardinals have a ton of draft picks, so it says, okay, we're going to draft a back at some point. Raiders also have some pretty good capital here. But this is a position you're definitely not going to force, right? If you've got someone decent, you can always get an undrafted guy and bring him into camp and see what he can do. So the Cardinals, why would they change this? This is one of the things that works actually on their team. Like they need maybe multiple wide receivers to draft. Offensive line help is certainly something they have to consider here. Really, their best 2 spots are running back and backup quarterback because they got Desmond Ridder. So when you look at that, I mean, I don't think this is going to be high priority. I think the higher priority is going to be those positions I mentioned, offensive line, wide receiver, and then flip it, and they're going to get some defensive help too for Jonathan Gannon. So again, Connor's steady enough. He's proved to be healthy. He does a lot of things well for them. I wouldn't be too worried about him. I'll put it right now as a 4. I think he still has good value. And again, someone's always going to come in and take touches from some of these guys, but Connor just does so many things well. I mean, really going back to the Steelers, where what I like about him, he can catch passes, be effective there. He's also a very good red zone running back, as we've seen the spike in touchdowns. So those are 2 elements that are going to keep you on the field and a lot of the key situations we're looking for in fantasy football.
And then 2 more names at running back that I think I'm a little bit worried about. One, I'm definitely worried about. I'm going to be sweating it out the most. It's Zack Moss, right? I know the Bengals let Joe Mixon go. They traded him off and then they signed Moss, but it's not to a big contract. Behind him is only Chase Brown. Now, do the Bengals feel this backfield is good enough to be a Super Bowl winning team? Because that's their goal. That's the Bengals' goal with Joe Burrow on their team, with Jamar Chase, with T. Higgins. Like their goal is to win a Super Bowl. Do they feel like this backfield is good enough? That's what worries me. They could try to find, someone, Jonathan Brooks, or someone that maybe they think is an upgrade. And then Devon Achane, with Raheem Mostert being 400 years old, and Achane being tiny, do they feel they need another guy to add to this backfield? And then it'd be like a 3-headed monster. Which of those 2 are you more worried about losing fantasy value in this draft?
Yeah, I think it's definitely Achane because look at Zack Moss. I think you saw what happened with the Bengals. There was a direct replacement for Joe Mixon, and they said, okay, we can get this same back for cheap, and you already have Chase Brown, so there's not much you need to chase off there in terms of, okay, we need to change up this backfield. But Dolphins might need to do that because of the durability issues, the age, and all that. And we know it's Mike McDaniel. He might want to toy with the backfield a little bit more, add another weapon. Remember how excited he was to get a Chan last year in the draft where they didn't expect it. So another guy could fall. We know from his 49ers days, that's what they used to do. They used to just draft backs all the time. And you were worried about the next guy, whether it was the Elijah Mitchell. And for while everyone is freaking out about Tyrion Davis Price, he didn't really pan out, but it's always the next guy. So I think that's the nature of these teams. I think the Bengals are not going to force their hand in drafting running back, but the Dolphins could toy with one in later rounds.
Yeah, I agree. I put them both at like a 6. I think they're pretty safe.
Yeah.
Or no, sorry, that'd be the opposite. 2. I put them at a 2 or 3. I think they're both pretty safe. I will say we haven't even brought up Gus Edwards because like he's getting his job taken away. The Chargers are taking a running back, so he's at a 10, a 20, wherever you want to put him. Like there's no even reason to discuss Gus Edwards.
He's touchdown dependent. I don't think he changes really his value, right? I mean, he got lucky with the touchdowns last year and they really spiked. The one thing good for him working in that offense, we know he'll have a dedicated role because it's Greg Roman. But yeah, we'll see. I don't know if I'm going to trust the Chargers running back. By the way, I think that would be the number one landing spot for Corum, just for many reasons, including Harbaugh being there. So if it's Corum and Edwards, Corum's going to be a lot interesting as a fantasy pick as a rookie.
Yeah. In our next segment, we're going to get into wide receivers, which guys, could their team add another wide receiver and really put competition on their target share that we're expecting to be much greater than it is at the moment, but it could be hurt from the draft.
Passion, drive, and patience. These are things we're looking for in a running back to produce on our fantasy team, but this is also the formula for winning championship and what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With more than 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not gas. With all the parts you need at all the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. All right, Michelle, let us continue, and we will now look at some wide receivers here that might be in jeopardy of losing their strong fantasy football status value here. So let's start with this. Drake London. This assumes maybe the Falcons are not done adding wide receivers or wide receiver help here for their new quarterback, Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, I mean, they already added Darnell Mooney, right? And last year it was Matt Collins who had the second highest target percentage on the team last year, and that was at 5.9%, extremely low. So you have to expect already Darnell Mooney is going to see a higher percentage than that. Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Bijan Robinson kind of dominated target share. With Drake London around 22%, that's okay. But you really, if you're going to be taking him as a top 12 wide receiver, you want that to be up towards 25%. It could happen with Kirk Cousins now there. The question is, if they add another wide receiver, such as Rome Odunze or Malik Neighbors with their, what are they, 8th overall pick, then is London even wide receiver 1 on that team because those guys are so good. So I mean, that first round, you got to be sweating it out if you're hoping for Drake London to have a big season next year.
Yeah, I just don't see the GM Terry Fontenot doing this. I mean, it's a new offense I know they've established, but they've already invested quite a bit at wide receiver. You mentioned Mooney, so I feel pretty safe about Drake London. I'm, in fact, excited about him because he's got a legitimate quarterback now in Kirk Cousins. So I'm going to put it as a 1. I would put it at 0.5 if I could. I'm not worried about Drake London. I mean, he was
so funny. I have him at like 6. I'm like really worried they're going to pick a wide receiver.
He was the first wide receiver drafted a couple years ago. He's a plus talent. They're not going to use another pick. They couldn't use a 4th straight first-round pick on an offensive skill player. I don't think it's happening. So they finally are probably going to get defense in this draft. So I think they have to go that direction. So I feel pretty safe about Drake London right now.
There is a solid chance that the top defender on the board could be sitting there for the Falcons. That would probably be very enticing for them. And that's really after the first round, even if they add a wide receiver, Drake London should still be the clear-cut wide receiver 1. You feel okay about it. Maybe you don't feel great about his workload being super high, but you got to get through those first 8 picks there before you can breathe again as a Drake London supporter. Another one, Zay Flowers. And my question for you is, I fully expect the Ravens to take a wide receiver. Would it be actually a good thing for Zay Flowers if they took a wide receiver? Because I think it would be.
Yeah, he needs some help. I mean, right now they just brought back Nelson Aguilar, and that's not going to do much here. And Rashad Bateman is, he's not been what they have expected as a first round pick. So, it seems like the Ravens have keep taking shots at first round wide receivers. So it could definitely happen here again. And I don't see them doing that necessarily because I think this class is pretty deep, but they could find another receiver that could complement Flowers. I think they need a guy with a little bit of size, so different options there later in the draft. So maybe a Johnny Wilson, a little bit of a tight end wide receiver hybrid that they could look at. A lot of big wide receivers that are available here. So Flowers, yeah, I think his value, I'm going to say right now, it's so for me. I mean, I don't want to be too investing in this Ravens passing game in general, but I'm going to put it at a 5 that I think he'll be okay. And like you said, a presence of someone else could help him, but I'm not going to go either way. That I'm too worried of lowering his value, ready to spike his value. I think it's about where it's going to be here, and that's why I have him at 5.
Yeah, I fully agree with you there. I actually think them getting a bigger guy in there that can, catch the contested catches, let Zay Flowers just dominate with his speed and separation skills and yards after the catch. Like, that's really what you want him to focus on. And that would be good for him. Christian Kirk. So right now he's the wide receiver 1 again for the Jaguars. We saw a couple years ago, he was really pretty solid as a fantasy asset, way better than we thought he was going to be when he got signed with the Jaguars. Got a ton of targets. And now with Calvin Ridley gone, he is in line to get a ton more again, except if they add a wide receiver early in this draft, could they overtake Christian Kirk? How certain are you that they're going to be going after a wide receiver here? In the first round, they're linked to Brandon Ayuk a little bit. Maybe they use that, or they take a wide receiver in the first couple rounds.
Yeah, it's an interesting offense because we didn't see Christian Kirk being the centerpiece of it when he arrived a couple seasons ago, but he kind of had to by default. They really threw to the middle of the field quite a bit. And we've seen this before with the Doug Peterson offense. We had that 1 year, speaking of Nelson Aguilar, where he went off there with Carson Wentz and doing all these things all over the field when they went to the Super Bowl. So I look at this and I'm like, I don't necessarily want to invest too much in the Jaguars passing game because of the way it was last year, but I think they have to get a more legitimate number 1. I mean, Kirk is a slot guy, and I think they need to look on the outside and pretty much go there. So, yeah, I'm going to be watching that with great interest, what they do in the late first round, even in rounds on day 2, because I think they're definitely going to make this a priority. There's a lot of depth there that they could go after. So, yeah, I'm going to watch out for who that outside target is. If he's someone I feel like could connect well with Trevor Lawrence, we're going to definitely knock out Christian Kirk. So I'm going to Christian Kirk at like a 6. I'm going to give him about right, I think, for him to maybe slide down a little bit.
6 or 7. I think they really wanted to keep Calvin Ridley, so they clearly aren't happy with just their current group of wide receivers. They wanted to keep him, just couldn't pay as much as the Titans were willing to pay. So I do fully expect them to fill that position early in the draft. So I put him at a 6 or 7 as well. One I'm really, really nervous about because I really want to love him as a sleeper guy later in drafts. It's Josh Downs of the Colts. I think he can be really, really good. When he was healthy last year before his knee injury started to flare up again, I thought he looked really impressive as a rookie. I think he could be a really solid wide receiver too, across from Michael Pittman Jr. However, the Colts might want to upgrade, right? Maybe they upgrade by taking a tight end and Brock Bowers, he could steal targets away, or taking a wide receiver there in the middle of the first or second round. I'm going to be sweating it out. Josh Downs and Zack Moss are 2 I'm going to be sweating out the most first. So I'm going to put Josh Downs at like an 8, and I really hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, I'm going to put him at a 10, and I might put him at 10.5.
Okay.
Because there's so many ways this could go down. The tight end, anytime. It doesn't have to be Bowers. It could be later. Wide receivers, definitely on the radar for the Colts. They're going to draft one. Don't forget about on the same team, Alec Pierce, and he's a field stretcher. So if you have the big arm of Anthony Richardson, you could unlock him a little bit more as a downfield threat here with Michael Pittman Jr. So, yeah, I'm just not feeling Josh Downs being what they wanted this offense. A lot of it, I think, was a product of Gardner Minshew and just having to throw shorter and in the middle of the field, where I think Anthony Richardson wants guys who can streak on the outside and make big plays.
Yeah, unfortunately. I hope we're wrong. I hope the Colts. I would be actually okay with Brock Bowers, but I hope they stay away from a wide receiver early and let Josh Downs try. I mean, he was an early pick last year. Give him another shot to stay healthy and see what he can do. And then one more wide receiver I wanted to just bring up. I'm actually not too worried about it, but I think it's a possibility. The Packers could go wide receiver early. I feel like nobody's considering this, but are we worried about Jaden Reed? Because right now it's Jaden Reed and Romeo Dobbs and Christian Watson. Like, there's no true wide receiver one yet. Maybe Jaden Reed can become that, but he hasn't yet, right? So there's not a dominant alpha wide receiver one for Jordan Love. Do they want to get him that? Unlike they ever tried with Rodgers there for a while, or are they just happy with the group they have? I think this could be a sneaky place for a wide receiver to go early, and that could hurt Jaden Reed's value.
Yeah, I'm going to put this around a 5 because I'm not exactly sure what they're going to do. It doesn't seem to line up with them going after more wide receivers if they have a lot of young guys, but they've piled it on here the last 2 drafts. So they could keep pouring it on to try to get offensive skill set that they want here around Jordan Love. So Jaden Reed, again, he works from the inside out, and some of these guys are hard to trust from season to season because, again, they're not the traditional receiver here, but then we've seen it work like gangbusters with Amon-Ra St. Brown. It works inside out for the Lions, and it's fine. So I'm feeling okay with Jaden Reed. I said 5, but I think I'm more – I could go 4 or 3 on this one. I just think he's that important to their offense going forward.
And it does just seem like the Packers really don't like to use early draft picks, or at least a first rounder on a wide receiver. But there are so many good guys they can get in the second or third round that I think are equal talent to Jaden Reed coming out of school. So I think we should be a little bit more worried than we are. So I'm going to put him at like a 5, 6. I'm not. Yeah, 5. I'll put him at a 5. Not extremely worried, but I'm a little worried. We're going to get into some tight ends that we could be sweating it out about during the NFL draft. One of them being your boy, Kyle Pitts. I mean, we just love to talk about him, right? We'll get into that right after the break. Guys, I need you all to listen up for this huge announcement. I have been tracking the leaderboards every day, keeping my eye on the scores, putting all my heart into it, and I'm super pumped to announce I am finally on top. That's right. Obviously, I'm talking about the hit mobile game Monopoly Go. You probably heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great mobile twist on classic Monopoly. You can play anywhere, anytime. You explore hundreds of Monopoly boards from Las Vegas to Camelot to the moon, all while racking in a huge fortune. Charge rent on iconic properties just like classic Monopoly. You can charge your friends rent on your iconic properties or go after their Monopoly money by pulling bank heists and taking wrecking balls to their landmarks. But my favorite part is the leaderboards where you can see who's a Monopoly tycoon and who's gone bankrupt. So go get yourself on the charts. Download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store and Google Play. This episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on the app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. The NBA playoffs are starting this week. I'm super pumped. My favorite bet of the week is the Miami Heat getting 4.5 points against the Philadelphia 76ers on Tuesday night in the NBA playoff play-in game. I think the Heat take down the 76ers. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We talked about Drake London, how we could be nervous about him losing some targets if the Falcons were to draft a wide receiver early. But what about Kyle Pitts? No, I don't think they're going to take a tight end or probably not in the entire draft, right? Maybe super late. But if they add another wide receiver, not even just being first round, in the second round, right? And then you have Drake London and Darnell Mooney and whoever this other wide receiver is, can you really expect Kyle Pitts to see more targets than he saw last year, which was at 90? Now, you can expect him to be more efficient with them, but are you worried about the workload he would have if they do take another wide receiver in the second, third round?
Right now, I'm going to put it at about a 2 because there's a couple reasons for this. I'm high on Kyle Pitts, as we've talked about, for this particular season, based on the offense and having Kirk Cousins. The other thing is, I don't know if you can get much more damage to your fantasy values with the way things were working in the previous offense, with having a second tight end and 12 personnel, not throwing the ball, not having a quarterback. So I think the more the merrier here for weaponry. I think they're in good shape overall, but I think they would add some depth. And what I like is, again, the 12 personnel, getting rid of that and going to 11 doesn't force them to get a tight end to replace Jonas Smith. So that's what I like. So I think he's going to be safe. I think the pecking order after, I think Drake London and Pitts, that's going to be more of the up in the air. Will they stick with Mooney and go that direction? But I feel pretty safe with London and Pitts. Again, two big beneficiaries of the quarterback move.
Yeah, you selected Kyle Pitts 4th overall. You're moving on from Arthur Smith because he refused to use your weapons. Like I just they got to finally figure it out to force feed Kyle Pitts here. And you just know Kirk Cousins likes to use his tight end. So I think he's pretty safe. I just wanted to put him in here to, mess with you. One guy, though, I am slightly worried about is Jake Ferguson. And it's, again, I don't think the Cowboys are going to take a tight end early. But they could take a wide receiver early. It's CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks, Jalen Tolbert, and really nobody else. And Brandon Cooks is on his last year and older. So Jake Ferguson last year only saw less than 17% of the team's target share. And again, that was with very little competition elsewhere. It's pretty much CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks. 102 targets. And we know the 102 is only because the Cowboys threw so much because his target share was not that great. If they add a wide receiver and his target share goes down even further than that, I mean, you're getting into like Okonkwo territory, even worse than that. That I am worried about Jake Ferguson if the Cowboys were to draft a wide receiver in the first couple of rounds.
Yeah, I'm going to put this at 8. I just don't know if Ferguson can hold on to his key role here. I don't think he's as talented as a receiver as Dalton Schultz was, and you could go back a ways with this chain of events here with tight end. But I look at Ferguson again. They drafted him, keep in mind, as a blocker, and I think he's been maybe pressed into more duty as a receiver than maybe anticipated because they've had some issues. They did move on from Michael Gallup, but I think this team has to get better at pushing the ball downfield and not settle for these shorter passes with Dak Prescott. And when they opened things up with CeeDee Lamb and others, so you saw the results. Dak was rolling here with some numbers. So I think there's a correlation to opening up the offense and less work here for Ferguson. So again, they could also draft a back that should be more involved in the passing game. So keep that in mind. That could be a better overall receiver than Tony Pollard. So there's different ways. I think they'll add some. I think they could even add some tight end depth in this draft. So all kinds of things say that he's in danger of not having as much fantasy relevance.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be pretty low on Ferguson already, but especially if they add a wide receiver early, then I am going to probably be out at his current cost, or even if he slips a little bit further than that. But I'm going to put him at like a 9. I'm worried about him at a 9 ranking here. Evan Ingram. So he was the opposite of Jake Ferguson. He actually led all tight ends in team percentage of targets last season by far. It was Evan Ingram at 20, nearly 24%, TJ Hawkinson at 21, Sam Laporta at 21. So it was a large gap here. He was getting a ton of targets. Now Kevin Ridley left. So even if they add a wide receiver, it shouldn't hurt him too bad. But what if they upgrade from Calvin Ridley? Because Calvin Ridley and Trevor Lawrence didn't have the greatest connection, right? So if they do use their first round pick to trade for a veteran wide receiver, or they move up to take a wide receiver, or take one of those wide receivers in the first round, how much would this push down Evan Ingram for you? Because I know you're not high on him anyways, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it'll push it up or down for me. So I'm going to say like 6. Like I think there's going to be some impact, and there's going to be another receiver that they bring in there that's going to have a key role, because you just can't go in with Kirk and Ingram as your top 2 targets. It's just not going to happen consistently. So we just have to see, is it going to be a tight end? Is it going to be a wide receiver? Are they going to go more 12 personnel and have that second tight end who can catch passes? Ingram is not really the best inline guy, so maybe you don't want to go in that direction. So I think you look at wide receiver. Yeah, it just really depends. If a first round wide receiver comes, I think that guy is probably going to be a good bet to lead the team in targets, but I'm not sure. I don't know if they're going to jump on a Brian Thomas, but if they do, then I think he immediately has more appeal than these other 2 guys. So again, it's hard to say with the Jaguars. They're going to be one of the teams we watch the most, but definitely if you get a wide receiver there, that's a landing spot. We'll get into that as well. The top landing spots for rookies, that would be one of them at wide receiver.
And then last up, we got to talk about Travis Kelce. Another year older, 34 years old. Could they go tight end early? Maybe JT Sanders out of Texas. Maybe their first round pick at the 32nd overall pick. Could they take him and he could maybe lessen his workload a little bit to stay healthy? Or do they take another wide receiver to go with Rashee Rice and Hollywood Brown? For Travis Kelce, because we're so used to him getting an easy 120 plus targets. Like you could bank on it, right? But maybe not if they keep adding bodies. How worried are you about Travis Kelce come draft time?
Yeah, we're not sure. This could be his last season as well, and we'll get a good indication, right? If they're looking at tight ends early or in the second round, that probably means they've got some indication that he's not going to be around. But I also think they could go after wide receiver and Brian Thomas if he becomes available late in the first round, maybe even make a little trade up to get him. And then all of a sudden you've got a legitimate outside receiver. You got a young big slot, Rashee Rice there. And the other thing is they've been careful. They've been kind of load managing Kelce in terms of just making him a focal point and giving him a ton of targets. They kind of saved him for the playoffs. So they might do that same thing, right? And have a little bit of youth movement, preserve his body here and go in that direction. Now, I'm not sure they'll draft his replacement yet. Here they've had a little bit of shuffle in the tight end room, but I think, again, we'll get a good indication, but I'm not going to worry about him yet. Again, I'm going to put this at a 1. Like they couldn't get a guy that could cut his targets, but he's still Travis Kelce. I saw in the playoffs that he's still at the peak of his game. He's certainly not going to be fading from this offense. I think it might be dramatic when we see it, but I need to see it before I can believe that.
I'm going to put him at a 4. I won't be shocked if they use that first. There's only really one option, right? It's Sanders from Texas. That goes with the 32nd overall pick. They're too far away from Brock Bowers. And then after that, I'm not going to be worried about any other tight end they take. It's those top 2 for me. And then another wide receiver. This might be one of the better wide receiver groups Kelce has ever played with if Rashee Rice, doesn't get suspended for any amount of time. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I will be keeping an eye on that for sure with Kelce because his price hasn't really dropped all that much. He's still super, super pricey in fantasy drafts. It will be so fun. 10 days away from the NFL draft. That is it for today's show. Thank you to you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Every day, Vinnie and I will be back tomorrow to talk more fantasy goodness. Don't miss it. Bye, y'all.